One fine morning, a loud voice echoed through the house, warning Takashi that if he didn't speedrun his morning routine and hurry up, she was going to leave him behind. Before heading downstairs, Takashi quietly stopped for a dramatic main character moment to look toward the medals of honor belonging to him and his comrades. After staring at them briefly, he finally answered that he was coming down. Meanwhile, Takashi's mother was radiating pure, wholesome energy, warmly telling them to enjoy school properly after being away from it for such a long time. After that, the group finally left the house together. From Takashi's memories, everything had begun 3 years earlier when war suddenly dropped the ultimate plot twist and spread across the entire world. The fighting broke out everywhere without regard for any country or location, all because of an alien invasion. Those horrifying days continued endlessly, so terrible that words could barely describe the absolute madness. Everyday life collapsed into a total nightmare while countless soldiers kept dying day after day, leaving nothing behind but the endless extermination of aliens. Takashi quietly let out a breath as he reflected on everything. After surviving through all those events and successfully destroying every single alien, he was finally scheduled to retire as of today. In a mental flashback, Takashi stared at the discharge papers in his hands, realizing 3 years had already passed since the day he was drafted as a soldier, which was the very same time he was supposed to be entering middle school. Looking back on it now, the time had passed faster than a skipped anime opening, and though he was not deeply emotional about it, there was still something inside his heart that felt touched. While watching the soldiers around him celebrate their survival, someone suddenly called out to him. His friend asked what he planned to do next, prompting Takashi to explain that he intended to return to his hometown before casually hitting Natalie with a reverse card, asking about her own plans. Natalie's tone suddenly dropped into a melancholic backstory as she explained that her hometown had already been completely annihilated, leaving her with absolutely nowhere else to go. Hearing that immediately made Takashi feel that the situation sounded incredibly pitiful. Confused, Takashi wondered what exactly she was trying to imply here, but Natalie simply giggled before suggesting the idea of Takashi taking her back to Japan so they could build a love nest and live together, admitting that she wanted to stay beside a certified strong man like him. But Takashi immediately denied that idea, insisting that he was definitely weaker than Natalie. Takashi quietly muttered to himself that there was really no helping it because he could never refuse Natalie whenever she asked for something, especially after she had clutched up and saved him so many times before. Natalie immediately became overjoyed and agreed with him, reminding him that he should properly treat the person who had literally saved his life. Takashi then reminded her that the living expenses would be split strictly 50-50, meaning she had to pay her share properly as well. Natalie started physically jumping around like an excited chibi character, happily agreeing that she would pay correctly and admitting that she was already looking forward to it. Takashi then thought about returning to his hometown first and reuniting with his parents, only hoping that they had not already assumed he was dead and held a funeral for him. Back at the place where they were staying, Natalie suddenly began thinking about something else while Takashi packed up his belongings. He asked her what exactly a retirement request was even supposed to be, and Natalie explained that it was basically something similar to a resignation letter. She had heard that people were supposed to write something like that whenever they quit. Otherwise, if someone disappeared without leaving behind any notice, the higher-ups would desperately start searching for Takashi. Hearing that made Takashi nervous, and he realized that he really should properly inform the Director General. Thinking it over, he admitted that Natalie's suggestion actually made sense, so he agreed that they should prepare a retirement request together. Natalie instantly unlocked her hyperactive mode again, loudly cheering as she rushed to suggest buying letter paper right away. When they arrived at the store, both of them immediately looked confused as Natalie stared around at the stationery on display, wondering if there was anything more lovely to choose from. However, Takashi suddenly noticed something important and called Natalie over to look at the price tag. The moment he saw it, Takashi was hit with absolute shock because even a single piece of stationery was costing a whopping $300. Natalie looked at the price as well and casually thought that the store must have raised its prices again, but Takashi could hardly believe it, thinking that even for the front lines, the price was way too expensive. Natalie then explained that prices had already skyrocketed to nearly 100 times higher compared to peacetime. Hearing that, Takashi suggested that ordinary origami paper would already be enough and they should just look for something cheap instead. Natalie also started wondering whether the store even sold inexpensive paper anymore, but before they could continue searching, a woman suddenly called out to them. The woman asked if he was Vice Corporal Shibasaki, causing Takashi to look at her in confusion. The woman immediately stood tall, raised an absolute bone-crushing salute, and introduced herself as Daisy Reeves, a former member of the Joint Special Command 3rd Land Assault Unit. Takashi quickly remembered hearing that Daisy had only been assigned around half a year ago, which Daisy nervously confirmed, admitting that it was an honor for her to be recognized by Vice Corporal Shibasaki. Takashi casually replied that Natalie's unit had been a complete mess back then and mentioned that Daisy had helped save them. Natalie immediately clung tightly onto Takashi's arm, refusing to let him brush things aside through confusion, while even threatening him playfully with a French kiss right there in public. Meanwhile, Daisy continued standing properly and politely requested 2 minutes of Takashi's time. Takashi repeated the words back in confusion, wondering about the meaning of those 2 minutes, when suddenly, Daisy lunged forward, deeply bowed her head, and loudly thanked him, completely catching Takashi off guard. Daisy revealed that until 1 year ago, she had worked at an orphanage in a neighboring country. She explained that their nation had enforced military conscription on every citizen because of the desperate strategic situation during the war. While continuing her story, Daisy admitted that she had guided the orphans every day while dreaming about peace someday returning. Takashi froze as he noticed the people nearby slowly starting to pay attention to them. Even while Takashi softly told her to raise her head, Daisy continued speaking. Tears started flowing from her eyes as she talked about spending time playing with children who still had a future ahead of them and discussing dreams together with those children. As she continued crying, Daisy admitted that now those children would no longer have to go to war, and she also thought about how she would never again have to hear reports announcing the deaths of those children. Takashi remained stunned while listening to her story, while Daisy cried even louder as she repeatedly thanked him for bringing the war to an end. People inside the store slowly started turning their attention toward Daisy, and the entire atmosphere became awkward enough to hit Takashi with immense second-hand embarrassment. While trying to think of what he should even do in that situation, Takashi awkwardly responded that everything was really fine. After that, he quietly turned around and muttered to himself that staying there any longer would only make things even more awkward, so he urged Natalie to hurry up so they could head back home. Before leaving the store, Takashi suddenly shouted toward Daisy, telling her to be happy before quickly leaving the 2 girls behind. He immediately started running away, still unable to process how Daisy had suddenly burst into tears like that. Being thanked so intensely made Takashi feel strangely uncomfortable, feeling itchy to him in a way he could not explain because he simply was not used to receiving that much praise. So he honestly did not know what kind of expression he was supposed to make. While walking away, memories from the war suddenly resurfaced in his mind as he remembered one soldier saying that once his role was finished, he needed to leave that place immediately, while another soldier nearby had also shouted at him, insisting that he should stop pretending to be one of them because he was no longer human anymore. Takashi headed straight home afterward because he no longer wanted to deal with any strange commotions, so he planned to quickly deliver the retirement request and finish everything as soon as possible. Suddenly, Natalie arrived while carrying a sheet of paper, excitedly showing it to Takashi and proudly presenting how lovely it looked. Takashi could hardly believe that she had somehow managed to get such cute letter paper, but Natalie then explained that Daisy had given it to them as a thank you gift. Apparently, Daisy had originally been saving that stationery to send letters to the children back in her hometown. However, Daisy had thanked them and admitted that she no longer needed it anymore since she could see them in person, wishing for both Natalie and Takashi to live happily. Natalie immediately clung on to Takashi again, while happily saying that the 2 of them should definitely be happy together. Takashi quietly agreed while continuing to stare at the paper in his hands. As they looked at it, Natalie commented that for someone who belonged to their unit, Daisy surprisingly was not very jaded, describing her as straightforward, or rather simply honest. Takashi quietly guessed that the war had ended before Daisy became tainted by all the stupid behavior and antics inside their unit. After finishing the retirement request, Takashi finally headed toward his workplace. The moment he arrived, he happily handed the letter over to the Director General. Although the director immediately looked confused after receiving it, she asked what exactly it was, and Takashi casually explained that it was their retirement request, thoroughly expressing their desire to return to Japan as strongly as possible. The Director General stared silently at the paper for a moment before immediately rejecting it. Takashi instantly shouted in shock, unable to understand why, but the Director General calmly explained that the strange and disgusting voice Takashi had just used counted as sexual harassment and was worthy of a court-martial. Takashi quickly defended himself by insisting that he was still a sensitive teenager, but the Director General immediately questioned what he even meant by sensitive, arguing that if Takashi counted as sensitive, then everybody else in the world would have to become ultrasensitive too, all while mumbling insults under her breath. Takashi also quietly muttered insults back at her under his breath, calling her unlucky all the way to her eyebrows, but despite that, he remained fully determined to go back to Japan. He continued trying to push forward with the retirement procedures, while Natalie happily added that the two of them would now live together from this point onward. The Director General suddenly stared at both of them with teary eyes before unexpectedly starting to cry, making both Takashi and Natalie feel incredibly uneasy. She immediately started yelling at Takashi, questioning why he was suddenly talking about retirement without considering the feelings of the Director General even a little. She pointed fingers at him while demanding to know what was wrong with him all of a sudden, continuing to rant that they were already overwhelmed with work since the war had only just ended, loudly begging him to at least help her out a little longer. The Director General then added that Takashi probably did not even realize yet that he would still need to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Takashi repeated the words non-disclosure agreement in confusion, and the Director General then explained that it was basically a contract stating that they were forbidden from talking about anything they had seen or heard during the war. Takashi quietly listened to her explanation as the Director General admitted that the war truly involved countless things that should never be spoken about openly. Even she herself had thrown her morals away just to survive through everything, and because of that, she understood the desire to hide those memories, and honestly, she did not want to talk about them either. She continued explaining that despite all of that, everyone still simply returned home on their own once everything ended. The Director General then revealed that she had been getting heavily scolded by the higher-ranking military officials lately because, according to them, if classified information were to leak out, somebody would need to take responsibility for it. After listening to her long explanation, Takashi simply responded that he honestly felt bad for her situation. However, he still questioned what any of that had to do with their retirement request. Since they were already planning to handle all the paperwork properly anyway, even though he carried the rank of vice corporal, Takashi pointed out that he was still nothing more than a 16-year-old brat, meaning there was no way someone like him could possibly have any real authority or responsibilities. The Director General immediately stared at him and questioned why he was making such an exhausted expression, looking at him pitifully while asking whether he truly did not feel sorry for the Director General constantly getting scolded like this. Takashi quickly responded that he had literally just said he felt sorry for her. However, he also questioned whether handling that responsibility was not already part of the Director General's actual job in the first place. The moment he said that, the Director General completely exploded in anger once again. She immediately declared that if Takashi was only going to act mean toward her, then his retirement request was officially rejected. She loudly announced directly toward him that from now on, Takashi would become the Director General's exclusive partner, meaning retirement was absolutely forbidden. Takashi's eyes widened in shock as he loudly demanded to know what she was even talking about while telling her to stop messing around with him. Meanwhile, the Director General started questioning herself emotionally, wondering why she should willingly let go of such an excellent soldier after everything for the sake of her own mental stability as Director General. She desperately begged Takashi to stay by her side, and she then started clinging on to him while trying to convince him by promising to shower him with affection. Takashi immediately rejected the idea, insisting that if the Director General truly wanted someone excellent, then she should simply go to Natalie instead of him. Right after saying that, he quickly turned toward Natalie and loudly tried to get her agreement. However, Natalie immediately clung tightly onto Takashi as well. She firmly declared that she belonged together with Takashi completely in both body and soul, meaning the two of them would never be separated. And afterward, Natalie mockingly told the Director General to rot miserably by herself while insulting her as a stupid eggplant. The Director General's expression immediately became even more frustrated after hearing that, and she stubbornly declared that both Takashi and Natalie absolutely had to stay, even if she had to use every bit of authority available to the Director General, fully refusing to allow either of them to retire. Meanwhile, Natalie only continued teasing the Director General after noticing tears starting to form in her eyes, casually joking that it served her right. Takashi stopped Natalie, telling her that he understood how she felt, but she really should not keep provoking the Director General any further. Meanwhile, the Director General continued sobbing loudly, and Takashi finally shouted for Natalie to just go home already. After they returned, Takashi immediately started packing up his belongings, and while doing so, he could not stop himself from cursing under his breath. There was no way he could accept only being allowed to go home as a reserve soldier, and even now he still was not convinced by any of it at all. Takashi honestly no longer wanted anything to do with the military, even though the war itself had already ended, and as he continued packing his things, he could only let out frustrated sighs. Natalie tried cheering him up, telling him not to look so depressed and suggesting that things were probably fine anyway because apparently, even reserve soldiers still continued receiving payments, meaning they could still live comfortably off passive income. However, Takashi immediately cut her off in frustration and called her an idiot, explaining that if they accepted the money, then eventually they would be forced to return again someday, and he absolutely did not want to stay involved with the military anymore. Natalie then started thinking about something and casually commented that Takashi really was an overly serious person. Takashi looked directly at her with a serious expression, because to him, the real issue was not whether they could simply run away from things or not. Inside his mind, he quietly wondered why he had to start living a life on the run together with Natalie now that the world had finally become peaceful again. He zipped up his bag, then turned toward Natalie while carrying his luggage. At that moment, Takashi firmly admitted to himself that all he truly wanted now was to live a completely normal high school life again. They were finally returning to Japan, and Natalie proudly smiled back at him. After finishing their preparations, the two of them walked through the hallway together. They boarded their flight and sat beside each other during the trip before finally arriving at the international airport. After the long flight, they transferred onto the subway, both quietly enjoying each other's company throughout the cozy ride. Many hours later, they finally arrived at Takashi's hometown. Takashi quietly observed the scenery around him while Natalie happily admired the town, realizing that this was the hometown Takashi had always talked about. Meanwhile, Takashi's eyes remained fixed on the familiar surroundings as he quietly reflected on how the town had not changed at all, exactly the same as it had been 3 years ago, meaning he really had managed to survive the plot and return home alive. While Takashi continued spacing out emotionally, Natalie suddenly commented that the town looked like the perfect place to build their love nest together. Her teasing immediately pulled Takashi out of his sentimental thoughts and made him look toward her while Natalie laughed and called him an idiot playfully. In response, Takashi grabbed her face and firmly reminded her that they were about to arrive at his parents' house very soon, so she needed to be careful. He seriously warned Natalie not to say anything wild or unnecessary, but Natalie casually responded that she already understood and insisted that she would not ruin the emotional reunion. According to her, she only planned to introduce herself and announce their marriage, almost as if she believed that would reassure him. However, Takashi immediately cut her off again, insisting that was exactly the kind of unnecessary thing he was warning her about. Natalie tried speaking again, but Takashi immediately told her to stay quiet. As they continued walking, Natalie clung tightly onto his arm. At that moment, Takashi quietly felt relieved that he had finally returned to the peaceful, everyday life he had wished for ever since 3 years ago. He softly smiled while looking at Natalie as memories from the war flashed through his mind once again, reminding him that to protect these peaceful days, he had fought while constantly risking his own life. The ordinary peace he had desperately wished for was finally right in front of him now. Takashi then remembered standing before the people who had once beaten him down, realizing that compared to those peaceful days that had remained unchanged, the one who had truly changed was himself. The absolute cinema initiated with Kazuya's older sister, Karen, trapped inside a tragic nightmare, desperately screaming out her brother's name while military police escorted him away like a player being banned from a server. She kept begging him not to leave her, but her brother only looked back at her with the absolute calmness of a true Sigma male, reassuring her that he would be fine before continuing on his way to the battlefield. Tears streamed down her face as she desperately questioned why her beloved brother had to go to war in the first place, until she suddenly woke up in a cold sweat while shouting his name. Still crying, she looked toward their dusty family photograph, realizing it had already been 3 long years since her brother was sent to the front lines. Back when he had first been drafted because of his compatibility score, she could hardly believe it, considering her brother had always just been an ordinary mid-tier student with average grades. She eventually stepped outside to once again check the local neighborhood board for military casualty notices, which had basically become her depressing daily routine. After finding nothing again today, she quietly thanked God that her brother was still alive and well. While she was standing there checking the papers, someone suddenly called out her name from behind. The moment she turned around, her jaw hit the floor as she saw her brother standing there before her. He casually greeted her after such a long time apart, admitting with a shrug that he had somehow managed to survive the war and make it back alive. Her eyes widened in complete shock while her brother awkwardly asked if his older sister was still functioning properly. Still unable to process the reunion, she suddenly lunged forward and hugged him tightly, repeatedly crying out his name. She openly declared how much she loved him, while he bluntly responded by pointing out how completely exhausted and haggard she looked. He asked if she had even been eating proper meals lately, because her face looked paler than a Discord moderator's, prompting her to quietly answer yes. He then suggested that they should immediately go eat some cheap beef bowls since she looked starving. Natalie immediately objected to the idea of a beautiful woman like herself being taken to a budget fast food joint. He disagreed right away, explaining that if they were on an actual date, he would obviously choose a proper restaurant. But if he was eating together with his wife, then a cheap beef bowl place was absolutely the correct choice because he wanted his close wife to experience his favorite food. Natalie instantly blushed after hearing the word wife. Meanwhile, Kazuya's sister became completely confused after hearing the term and immediately questioned who Natalie even was. He casually introduced her, prompting Natalie to proudly declare her name and openly announce that she and Kazuya were already married with the full intention of having babies together. The moment she heard that bombshell, Kazuya's sister froze in absolute shock like a character hit by an infinite stun lock. He immediately told his sister to calm down, explaining that Natalie was simply a loud idiot who had fought beside him during the war, and since she had nowhere else to go, she had decided to follow him home like a stray dog. He added that he would personally look after her, so she could basically just ignore Natalie completely. However, Natalie quickly complained that he shouldn't tell his sister to ignore her, as she genuinely wanted to get along with her future sister-in-law. Kazuya's sister immediately shouted back in shock that she absolutely refused to allow Natalie to marry her brother. Natalie dramatically declared that a massive obstacle had already appeared between the married couple, while Kazuya jokingly commented that the higher the wall standing before love, the stronger that love burns, even begging his sister to become an even taller wall for them. Hearing that completely stunned his sister because her brother had never been the type of person to make weird jokes like that before. He eventually decided that they should stop talking and just go eat first, promising that he would explain the details properly once they arrived at the restaurant. The three of them headed to the diner and started eating together. While watching both Kazuya and Natalie inhale their food, his sister questioned whether they were really going to be all right consuming that much food. However, Kazuya immediately turned the concern back toward her instead, stating that the real issue was whether that tiny amount of food was even enough for her, since it had been so long since he last properly ate rice. To him, even this massive feast still felt slightly too little. His sister quickly shook off the topic and got straight to the point, directly asking him what kind of relationship he actually had with Natalie. He casually answered that the two of them were simply best friends for life, while Natalie proudly declared that they were seriously the strongest married couple possible. His sister immediately demanded a serious answer, directly asking whether they were dating or not. Both Kazuya and Natalie froze for a moment before suddenly bursting into laughter together. To him, hearing the word dating again felt strangely nostalgic, and Natalie also laughed at the word itself. Afterward, he slowly began explaining the harsh reality of their past. Back on the battlefield, there had constantly been countless dead soldiers around them, and entire squads that charged into battle were often wiped out completely. Even the few who miraculously survived would frequently die during another suicide assault the very next day, making every single day feel like standing side by side with death itself. He explained that some soldiers tried escaping reality by relying on substances, but they often ended up dying anyway because they could no longer move properly during combat, driving even more people insane. Because of that, soldiers eventually started openly speaking about whatever small hopes for living still remained inside their hearts, with some dreaming about getting married, others wanting children, and many simply wanting to survive long enough to see their families again. As long as they survived today, tomorrow would still exist for them, and those small dreams were what motivated everyone to keep moving forward. That was why hearing the simple word dating now felt incredibly nostalgic to him. His sister could only sit there in complete shock while listening to his explanation, while Natalie casually pointed out that she looked completely creeped out by the story. Suddenly, his sister started crying, admitting she never realized things had been that cruel for them on the front lines. He immediately felt guilty after seeing her reaction, quietly thinking that he probably should not have talked about those depressing things at all. Trying to change the atmosphere, he gently called out to her and reminded her that she would never regain her energy if she did not eat properly, promising that since he had safely managed to return home alive, he wanted all of them to eat a lot today. Meanwhile, Natalie happily decided that she was going to order drinks and curry for herself, asking what the other two wanted. He immediately answered that he wanted katsu curry, while his sister quietly replied that water alone would be enough for her. She quietly wiped away her tears while repeating the words safe and sound to herself. slowly realizing that the beloved brother she had finally reunited with after 3 long years felt slightly different from the boy she used to know. After finishing their meal, they headed back home together. The moment Kazuya's parents saw him walk through the door, they froze in complete surprise. He calmly greeted both of them, announcing that he was finally home. His mother immediately rushed toward him and hugged him tightly while crying, while he casually mentioned that he had somehow managed to come back alive after everything, almost as if he still found it unbelievable himself. His mother continued welcoming him home through her tears. While hugging her, he quietly observed her closely, suddenly realizing that her body had become much thinner and smaller than before. Even their heights had completely reversed now, and there was noticeably more white hair on her head. Just from not seeing each other for only 3 years, his once energetic and youthful mother had changed that much, and the realization alone was enough to make him tear up as well as he tightly hugged her back. Soon after, his father also started crying before hugging both Kazuya and his wife together, repeatedly expressing how thankful he was that his son had safely returned alive. He quietly apologized for making them worry all this time, but his father immediately answered that as long as he was safe, nothing else truly mattered. After their emotional reunion settled down slightly, Natalie suddenly called out to him, quietly whispering for him to hurry up and properly introduce the cute Natalie Chan to the rest of the family. He glanced at her before finally introducing her to his parents. Natalie introduced herself as his comrade in arms, Natalie, explaining that her hometown had been completely destroyed and that every single one of her relatives had already died, leaving her with nobody else to rely on except him. She sincerely promised that she would not cause any trouble and politely asked them to allow her to become part of their family. His mother looked completely confused and asked whether Natalie was simply Kazuya's friend, but Kazuya immediately corrected that idea and explained that she was far more than just a friend. She was literally his comrade in arms from the battlefield, outstanding enough that there was practically nobody in the military who did not know her, and she had even saved his life multiple times throughout the war. He explained that because of Natalie, he had been able to safely return home and reunite with them like this. The moment they heard that, both of his parents were left completely shocked. Without hesitation, his mother tightly hugged Natalie while repeatedly thanking her through tears. Natalie looked confused by the sudden affection and quietly asked what was wrong, but his mother continued crying while thanking her over and over again for saving her son's life. Natalie honestly did not know how to respond anymore, while Kazuya's mother tearfully insisted that Natalie could stay with their family forever if she wanted, repeatedly telling her that their home would always welcome her. Even while still crying nonstop, his mother tightly held Natalie's hands and continued thanking her again and again, and watching the scene before him, Kazuya quietly smiled. Natalie also smiled warmly back at his mother, and at that moment everyone there was genuinely happy. Later that night, inside the bedroom, Natalie admitted that Kazuya truly had wonderful parents, honestly never expecting them to accept her so quickly like that. Meanwhile, he quietly admitted to himself that he had actually been hoping his parents would refuse to hand their son over to her. Natalie casually remarked that it was too bad her wonderful inner personality had not come out during the meeting, but he immediately thought that the only reason his parents accepted her so easily was precisely because that inner side of Natalie never appeared, leaving Natalie completely speechless. Afterward, Natalie climbed out of bed and shifted the topic to something more serious, questioning whether he truly did not need to tell his family about it. He looked toward her and asked what exactly she meant, prompting Natalie to clarify that she was referring to his body. Kazuya quietly turned toward her. Originally, he had fully intended to tell his family the truth as well, but after seeing the worried expressions on their faces earlier, he simply could not bring himself to say it anymore. Natalie gently pointed out that his mother had looked unbelievably happy after finally reuniting with him, but Kazuya explained that nobody could casually reveal to their crying mother that her son's body had already been modified. To him, telling them the truth would not make anybody happy anyway, so he believed it was obviously better to keep silent about it instead. He then firmly admitted that he intended to keep it hidden for the rest of his life, since the modifications did not interfere with his daily life anyway, seeing no reason to reveal it. Natalie simply warned him not to get caught, especially since he could be pretty clumsy at times. Soon after, he excitedly changed the topic again and announced that their transfer destination had already been decided, and they would be attending the exact same high school as his sister. I can finally run to school with a piece of toast in my mouth like a classic anime protagonist. Right at that moment, his sister suddenly walked into the room, asking whether he was seriously planning to attend her high school. He casually confirmed it, although he admitted that he still needed to pass the transfer exams first, and the moment Natalie heard the word exams, she immediately reacted with disgust. Elsewhere, inside a dark room, a phone continued buzzing nonstop from an endless stream of missed calls. The name displayed on the screen was Agami, who gritted his teeth in frustration before finally throwing the phone away in anger, while shouting furiously about why she refused to answer any of his calls. Consumed by irritation, Agami declared that she was underestimating him and swore that he would definitely make her become his woman someday. Meanwhile, back at the house, Natalie kept reading her textbook while complaining that studying for the exam was such a pain, suggesting that they should just ask the military to pull some strings so they could transfer schools easily. However, Kazuya argued that involving the military would immediately expose them as returnees from the battlefield, and they would only stand out in a bad way. He wanted to live a normal high school life, and Natalie's idea did not sound like something a triumphant warrior would do. He reminded her that she could easily pass if she used her unique traits, to which Natalie simply agreed, but then his sister suddenly questioned whether the two of them were actually being serious. Both of them turned toward her as she pointed out that they were trying to cover 3 whole years of middle school studies just by browsing books at the store. Natalie confidently believed it was a piece of cake, while Kazuya explained that they did not have the time to attend cram school anyway. His sister could only stare at them before bursting out, explaining that her high school did not have such a low standard that anyone could pass just by casually browsing books, as the school actually ranked on the higher end within the prefecture. She had finally started hoping that she might be able to attend school together with her brother, only for that hope to turn into nothing. Kazuya simply told her that he was concentrating and ordered her to stay quiet, as both he and Natalie were focusing seriously. His sister quietly observed them and thought about how for the past 5 days, the two of them had repeatedly browsed books from opening time until closing time. Even today, they had already been doing it for over 6 hours straight, and their concentration honestly amazed her, though she felt it was not exactly something worthy of praise. Suddenly, Natalie happily closed her book and announced that she had already finished reviewing 3 years' worth of every subject. She immediately grabbed Kazuya's sister, saying they were done studying and wanted to look around the store instead. His sister questioned whether she was truly fine with the studying, but Natalie confidently reassured her that there was no problem and everything had been perfectly completed. His sister worried properly about her despite the fact that she was basically freeloading there, and that was exactly why Natalie loved her so much. Meanwhile, his sister quietly felt guilty inside because even though she had tagged along while trying to get in the way of their relationship, hearing Natalie say something like that only made her feel worse. Kazuya and Natalie were unbelievably close, always together, and somehow it had even become normal for them to sleep in the same room. The distance between them felt completely strange for a boy and girl their age, and his sister could not help describing Natalie in her mind as a perfect doll with a friendly personality, smiling like an angel. Yet her brother acted completely unaffected by it, making her wonder what kind of relationship the two of them truly had. Then, suddenly, Kazuya's sister noticed something that immediately frightened her. Natalie asked what was wrong, and standing right behind her was a massive, tall man who was none other than Agami. The moment he called out her name, she became visibly scared as he shouted right near her face, calling her a bastard while demanding to know why she had ignored his calls and whether she was mocking him. Natalie immediately grabbed her shoulder and warned Agami not to touch her. Agami instantly became furious, raging at her while threatening to destroy her after dealing with his sister. However, Natalie calmly asked whether he wanted to die, and that only made him even angrier as he mocked her nerve for standing there with such a smug expression. Agami then decided that he would violate Natalie so badly, but the moment those words left his mouth, Natalie's expression completely changed. In a cold voice, she quietly declared that she would kill him, leaving the sister watching in shock, unable to believe that this was really Natalie because she suddenly looked like an entirely different person, reminiscent of a terrifying assassin from Hunter x Hunter. At that moment, Kazuya arrived behind them and immediately questioned why Natalie was releasing such immense bloodlust, warning her not to cause trouble for ordinary people. Natalie quickly defended herself, insisting that she had done nothing wrong and that Agami was clearly the bad one, angrily calling him an arrogant meathead and suggesting that they crush him because he seemed to be stalking his sister. Kazuya became confused and turned toward his sister, asking whether Agami was her friend. She immediately denied it. He apologized right away, assuming that he had completely assumed Agami was her friend, and that Natalie had messed with him and made him angry because of her short temper. Even that single comment clearly showed the kind of impression Kazuya had of Natalie. Then Agami spoke up and asked Kazuya whether he was her younger brother, mentioning hearing that he had gone off to war or something similar. He was visibly surprised, admitting that it was true while also questioning how Agami knew so much about him, but Agami only grinned before walking away. After he left, Kazuya questioned who that guy even was and wondered why he was wearing such a ridiculously tight shirt. Natalie casually remarked that Agami was probably just an idiot who did not even know his own clothing size. His sister immediately told both of them to stop talking like that and explained that there was not a single student in her high school who did not know Agami. She explained that he was an anomaly who enjoyed watching people suffer more than anything else, extremely strong in fights, and had even half-killed professional fighters before. Every single day he caused trouble without consequence because his parents were famous dignitaries with influence and power, meaning nobody could stop him. Many students had already refused to come to school because of him, and she admitted that she could not even bring herself to explain everything he had done. To think that she herself had become one of his targets. She remembered Agami pinning her against the wall while forcing her to become his woman and threatening the people around her, while her classmates had desperately tried to protect her even while risking their own safety. But that only cornered her even more as her classmates kept getting hurt because of her, and the guilt became so painful that she eventually could no longer bring herself to attend school. More than anything, she did not want her brother and the others getting involved, especially after he had finally managed to return alive, as she could not bear the thought of dragging him into something painful all over again. While she remained deep in thought, Natalie suddenly remarked that Agami was far too dangerous and that she knew she should have dealt with him earlier. Kazuya was about to say something, but Natalie continued complaining about how annoying Agami was. Then his sister received a message from him on her phone, warning that if she did not want her little brother to get killed, she needed to come to Agami's house immediately. Back at home, Kazuya repeatedly called out to his sister during dinner, and she only responded on the third attempt. She quietly asked why he was calling her, and he pointed out that the food was spilling. However, her mind remained trapped on Agami's message, and she began thinking that maybe she should simply prepare herself and accept his invitation, questioning whether that was the only choice left for her. She convinced herself that everything would be fine as long as she endured it, believing that had to be the best solution. Kazuya moved closer and questioned what was wrong with her because she kept spacing out. Panicking, she stumbled over her words and awkwardly asked what he meant, but he pointed out that she was panicking way too much. Ever since they returned home, she had been acting strange, and he directly asked whether something had happened. Stuttering nervously, she insisted that nothing was wrong before quickly thanking them for the meal and trying to leave the table. But Kazuya suddenly grabbed her arm and bluntly pointed out how terrible she was at covering things up. She froze in place and nervously asked what he was talking about, to which he casually replied that it was the same as always before asking whether she had been worrying about the guy from earlier that afternoon. Natalie immediately joined in, pointing out that she had obviously been acting strange ever since they met that guy. She quickly denied it again, but Natalie reminded them that she herself had said Agami was stalking her. Kazuya then provocatively asked whether Agami really was a stalker, but she denied it once more and insisted that there was nothing for them to worry about. However, Kazuya immediately pointed out that she had completely stopped talking ever since they got back from the department store, questioning what exactly she had been thinking about while making such a tearful expression. She could no longer respond, never realizing that he had been watching her so closely the entire time, and now she no longer knew what to do with the two conflicting emotions inside her. Part of her desperately wanted him to help her, yet at the same time she did not want him involved at all, wanting him to save her but also wanting to protect him from getting dragged into this situation. She understood that if she cried right there, it would immediately reveal how deeply worried she truly was. Kazuya quietly stared at her before telling her that it was better to confide her worries to the people around her, warning that if she kept everything bottled up inside, her perspective would only narrow, and eventually she would no longer be able to deal with it properly. He gently encouraged her to at least try telling them because they were family after all, and the moment those words reached her, she finally burst into tears. Afterward, Natalie and Kazuya carefully read through all the messages on her phone. He could hardly believe what kind of person Agami was, while Natalie completely agreed, questioning how someone like him could even grow up into such a complete scumbag. Meanwhile, Natalie coldly remarked that men like Agami should be sent straight to the battlefield so they could die there immediately. Kazuya glanced toward Natalie and quietly realized that things were becoming dangerous, as the bad habit she had not shown for a long time was beginning to surface again. If Natalie and Agami ever came into contact once more, the situation could easily turn into something far worse. His sister continued crying while apologizing to both of them for dragging them into her problems, unable to stop thinking about the possibility of him getting hurt because of her. Meanwhile, Kazuya calmly held onto her phone and immediately blocked Agami's calls and messages, declaring that the matter was finished. even sending Agami a message saying that the police would be called and that he should tremble in fear while sleeping. She stared at him in complete shock while Natalie burst into laughter, clearly impressed by his response. His sister quickly grabbed her phone back and worried that what he did was dangerous, but he casually reassured her that everything was fine, calling her too much of a worrywart. He calmly told her to leave everything to him because he and Natalie were together anyway, but she still could not process the situation at all, only thinking about them being placed in danger because of her. He quietly noticed once again that she always worried more about other people than herself, reassuring her that things would somehow work out, but she immediately insisted that they would not. Later, the three of them went out together. While walking, she nervously called out to Kazuya and suggested that they should just head home already. However, he pointed out that even though the transfer exam was approaching, they could not simply lock themselves inside the house forever, as they still needed to look for another bookstore where they could browse and study. She anxiously questioned what they would do if Agami found them again, but Kazuya calmly reminded her that she was together with him, so everything would be fine. In fact, he admitted that he was far more worried about Agami showing up while she and Natalie were alone sitting together. Hearing that, she quietly agreed, knowing that Natalie would absolutely show no mercy if something like that happened. And the last thing he wanted was to come home and find a crowd of police officers gathered outside the house. For Agami's sake as well, he believed it was safer for the three of them to stay together as a group. As they continued walking, Natalie quietly informed him that they were being followed. Kazuya already knew, judging by the way the men walked and the shifts in their center of gravity, telling him they were carrying something similar to tool knives. Natalie irritably commented that they were seriously annoying and casually asked whether she could deal with them herself. Absolutely not, Kazuya immediately refused. Knowing you, you'd end up trying to unleash a domain expansion on some level 1 rookie. He then started walking down a different path, causing his sister to quickly ask where he was going. He calmly explained that he thought it would be better to settle her worries first, and though she was confused, he only reassured her once again that everything would be fine. Meanwhile, the men following them suddenly stopped and started calling someone on the phone. Then, while they continued walking together, a car suddenly sped past them from an extremely close range, making all three of them freeze in place.